Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the channel. It's a pleasure to have you with me. We are celebrating 25 subscribers and over 12 hours of watch time. This is a huge milestone given that we've had the channel for approximately a month. In the previous video tutorial, which I will leave a link to that above, we talked about callback functions, what they are, and how to use them effectively. We talked about its main drawback, which was the callback hell, which had to do with readability, and we also mentioned promises briefly. In this video tutorial, however, we'll dive deeper into promises. We will also look at async await in JavaScript. By the end of the video tutorial, you will have a great understanding of how and when to use each approach to perform asynchronous operations in JavaScript. We will also compare and contrast each approach, and we will see how we can use them in real-world examples. Without much chit-chat, let's hop in and let's get cracking. So let's discuss what promises are. A promise basically represents a value that could be available now or in the future or never. And usually this has three states. You have the pending, you have the fulfilled, and the rejected. The pending usually is when that request has not been made at all. Fulfilled is when the promise is successful and handled in the catch function. Sorry, the then. Then you have the third state, which is basically when the promise is rejected, or which means that the request was not successful. And this is handled in the .catch. Let's make a very basic analysis of what this is, or this could look like in the real world. Let's say that you go to a buyer goes to a local dealer and says, I want laptop X based on a given specification. This usually is when, say, a user makes a request for a web page or makes a request on API or a backend for a given product ID. The dealer now goes to the warehouse to check if this product is in stock. This usually is when a request is made to the database to return back a product of, say, a given specific ID. The local dealer could come back now to the buyer, and there are usually two outcomes when that happens. The first outcome is that the dealer does find the product and brings it to the buyer. This, in terms of programming, will be when the promise has been fulfilled. The other case is when the local dealer goes and then that product is not in stock, or maybe there were some logistical issues. This is equivalent to that particular promise being rejected, and this could be due to the fact that an invalid product ID was provided, or maybe there were network issues or connectivity issues in general. So let's hop into code and see how we can play around with this. So our project structure is that we have a database which contains a list of products and two functions. The first function just returns a list of products, and then the second one uses the first function and then gets a product ID as a parameter and returns a product based on that specific ID. But the first thing you have to do is that you have to ensure that you have Node installed, and also have to ensure that you have nodemon as well. So you do a node-v and a nodemon-v. Now we're going to move into our index.js file, and then we're going to run our dev server by typing nodemon index.js. And we'll start by creating our function. So we'll say function fetch product by ID promise. Let's put a space between those two. It's going to take a parameter of product ID. And what we want to do is return a new promise. And that promise will take two callback functions. It's going to take the resolve and the reject. And what we want to do is pass in an arrow function. Inside here, we're going to do a set timeout to mimic a slight delay, which takes a callback function, and then we'll pass in 1000 milliseconds, which is approximately 1 second. Inside here, the first thing we want to do is check if the user, while calling the function, did provide the product ID. We're going to say if not product ID, we want to do a reject. And inside that reject, we want to pass an object. You can pass a string, it doesn't matter. But in our case, we want to pass a JSON object. So we'll say success, false, because we did not successfully do anything with our function. And then we want to pass a message that says, please provide product ID. You can put whatever message you want there. So once that is settled, what we want to do is we want to say const product is equals to get product by ID. and we pass in the product ID to that. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that our get product or ID returns either a product or undefined. So we need to check for that. So we come down here, we can use an if else statement, but we're going to use a ternary operation for that. So basically we're going to say if our product was found, we want to call the resolve, and we pass in an object saying success of true, and then we want to pass in the product object itself. If that was not the case and we got undefined, we want to reject, and then we pass in a success of false, and then we can pass in a message that basically says the product with product ID not found. So that should do the trick. So let's go ahead and look at 3 different instances. The first instance is that we call the function without providing a product ID, and we see what is going to be logged down. So we come and then we say fetch product by ID promise, and we do that. And then remember the promises, we do a .then. That is if the promise was fulfilled. It should take a data, and all we want to do is log the data to the console. And then once we have that, we can do the .catch, and this should receive an error which comes from the reject. And all we want to do is console log that error for now. Let's get rid of the semicolon. So when we paste that, we realize that we did not provide it with the ID. So it comes in here and it reaches at this point and say, okay, fine, you did not provide the ID, so I'm going to reject this. Now, the next test we can do, let's copy this and let's comment it out. Let's come down here. Let's provide it with an invalid ID. Remember that in our database, we have a product with IDs of 1 to 3. So let's provide an ID of 4. And what you notice is that it tells us that the product with ID of 4 was not found. Now let's see a case where we do provide it with an ID that we know is found in the database. And obviously, as you speculated, we should get success of true, and it gives us back that particular product that we did fetch for. We can do ID of 2, and it will give us product with ID of 2. So let's try to understand what an async await function is. So an async await function basically returns a promise, right? So the main issue that was discovered was not necessarily an issue, but it was a readability issue in the sense that a promise can return multiple promises. And in order to resolve this, you have to chain the .then calls. So there was a need to find a way to write code that looked synchronous, but actually was asynchronous. Now, the key notes you have to look at is that async functions will always return a promise, and that you await. The await makes JavaScript wait for a promise to be resolved. So the way to write an async await function is that you mark the function as async, and then you use a try catch block. But the action that waits for a promise to be resolved is usually placed in the try block, while when an error occurs, you catch the error in the catch block. Now, we already know what our promise function looks like. It returns a promise. And if we want to use the promise way of handling that, we use the .then and .catch. And remember that if we have multiple promises being returned in our function, then we will have to chain the .then calls. Now, let's see how we can consume this function, but in an async await manner. So let's copy this, and let's say, remember that we have to do an async at the beginning, and then we say async function, and then we say fetch product by ID async. It's going to receive a product ID. The main thing, or the first thing we need to do, is that we need to do our try catch, and in the catch block, we're just going to say console log error, and we will just pass in the error object. Now, inside the try block, we're going to do a const, and we'll say result, which is going to be equals to await, and then we want to call the fetch product by ID promise, and we'll pass in the product ID as expected. Below, we're just going to do a console log. We'll say, should say result, not error, and we're going to pass in the result as well. Now, this is all well and good, and let's see how to we will use that function by calling it without a product ID, invalid product ID, and then a valid product ID. So all we have to do is call this function here, which is this function. And because we passed in no product ID, we get a please provide product ID as expected. If we pass in an invalid ID, we should get the product ID not found. And if we pass in a valid product ID, we should get result, which is this, and then success true, and then the product for that given product ID. So let's look at the real world example. We're going to say const URL is equals to HTTPS. This is a JSON placeholder API. And we're going to be looking at the post object in that. So let's do a function. Let's come here. Let's say function fetch. Let's copy this. And then it's going to take a post ID. And then we're going to say fetch. So fetch basically comes with node and helps us to make a request or API request. So we're going to do a backslash and we'll say URL, then a forward slash, and then we're going to pass in the post ID. Now let's call the function here at the bottom. And then when we do run the fetch, we're going to do a .then. Now this is the case where the promise function returns multiple promises. So you can see that if we do .then and we pass in the response, let's log this response so that you can see what I'm talking about. So response.json. So let's also add the .catch for good measure. So get the error, and let's do a console log of error.message. Let's get rid of the semicolon. So if you notice, we're logging this response.json and it tells us that it's still pending and it's a promise. So let's get rid of this. So this is obviously going to be handled in the chain.then where we get the data, and all we're going to do is log the data. We get this particular data of the ID of 10. Now let's mimic an error. Let's just play around with this URL and save. Then we get an error that says fail fetched. So let's look at how we can consume the API using async. So let's say async function, and then let's copy this because we're a little bit lazy. It's going to get the post ID. And what we want to do initially is to run our try catch, and in our catch block we're going to log error and then pass in the error .message. And in our try block we just do a const response is equals to await. Let's copy this part here, the fetch, and then at the bottom we'll then say const data equals to await response.json, right? Once we have that, we can just do a console log, and then we save data, and then let's console log the data. Let's go ahead and run this, and we should get the same effect. So we can change this to 1 or to 2, and then we get that, and then we can mimic an error as well, and we should get error fetched failed. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. I hope you did like the content, and if you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Don't forget to hit the notification button as well. Stay up to date with new content. Till next time, stay blessed and in good health.